Britain today is a real melting pot. We have people from many different locations, many different cultures, many different ethnic groups. So where do they all come from? We invited 6 well-known friends of the museum to have their DNA tested.
We all ask ourselves these questions from time to time. Who am I? Where do I come from? How did I get here?
I was pretty convinced that my heritage came from Africa, but my mother is fairly fair-skinned, so I'd always assumed that she had some European blood in her.
I don't know an awful lot about my family history. I only know going back about 3 or 4 generations, I think.
When everyone else has ever asked me, you know, where do you come from ethnically, it's always been a very long answer.
Everybody wants to be able to look into their past and to see where we might have come from. It connects you with a wider world.
We've all got a history contained in our DNA. So scientists can look at thousands of markers and track our evolutionary history. And in particular, there are 2 lineages that can be looked at. A maternal one from mothers to children, and a paternal one from fathers to sons. Unless you're looking at the whole genetic code, you obviously haven't got the complete story. But by looking at these specific lineages, it's possible to reconstruct some of these journeys that ancestors took in the distant past. Everyone today descends from ancestral populations that once lived in Africa.
I'm quite stunned that it's possible to go back so far. It's almost biblical in its feel. I mean, you're not quite back to somebody called Adam and Eve, but sort of to a Garden of Eden.
About 60,000 years ago, a small group of modern humans moved out of Africa and into Western Asia. We don't know why they did that. Maybe they were just following their food. Maybe they were looking for new places to live.
Perhaps the group that came out of Africa was just a few hundred people, perhaps 1,000 people. So it's a relatively small number of people that are the ancestors to all of those non-African populations.
The thought of being in the world at that time is just incredibly exciting. Yes, it would have been perilous, it would have been dangerous, yet there's a sense of this opportunity, discovery, that would have driven them on.
Not all modern humans left Africa. Many of them stayed behind and then they dispersed and migrated within Africa.
What the maps showed was that I think life began in East Africa, and my parents come from West Africa, and it showed sort of a sort of gradual migration, not very far at all, across from East Africa to West Africa. But the fact that it seems that I am a sort of 100% African makes me very proud.
Around 55,000 years ago, within the population that had left Africa, there was a major split in one of these maternal lineages, one that produced 2 main divisions. And one group largely stayed in Western Asia and eventually migrated also into Europe. The other group headed eastwards towards the Far East.
On my paternal side, it's a pretty straightforward story, really. They end up eventually in southern China, and that's what I would have expected. That's what I know of that history. On the maternal side, it's a slightly more complicated story, it appears, with them sweeping out and getting out as far as the Americas and Australasia in the end.
The modern humans that moved out of Africa and into Western Asia moved into an area where the Neanderthals were living, their evolutionary cousins. They must have met, and there was some interbreeding between them.
I mean, obviously it may not have been as pleasant as all that, the interbreeding, but you would like to think of it as a nice, pleasant coming together. It was probably a bit grimmer than that. But the idea that poor old Neanderthals were pushed to one side, that they live on a bit in us, and I'm glad there's at least 1.8% of them in me.
I wasn't aware that I'd have any Neanderthal in me, although probably some of my friends and family would disagree.
I come out as quite Neanderthal. I was quite surprised. Dad said that my mum is a bit short and stocky, so he imagines that the Neanderthal side of the family is definitely hers.
The modern humans that remained in Africa don't show traces of Neanderthals in their DNA. Their ancestors never interbred with Neanderthals, so there's no Neanderthal DNA there, except where there have been later back migrations into Africa.
As it turned out, I had no Neanderthal ancestry at all. And now, actually, with a retrospectroscope, I think maybe it would have been nice to have a bit.
At least 40,000 years ago, modern humans started to enter Europe from Western Asia. Some of these groups came in very early as hunter-gatherers and stayed there. Other groups came much later with the spread of farming.
My maternal line are relatively late arrivals in Britain or Europe, maybe only a few thousand years ago, coming with the spread of agriculture up through Europe. Whereas my father's line seems to have been here a bit earlier, going up north towards Scandinavia. So I like to feel that I look a bit like a sort of, I don't say I look like a Viking, but I look like sort of Scandinavian, Germanic kind of look there, and I like the cold. So maybe that's my father's line I can follow back there.
My ancestors were the last to settle down. So they were the most nomadic of those people. And so I feel this affinity with a kind of people who were constantly looking what's around the next bend, what's over the next hill. And I feel very much a connection with that.
If we look at the specific maternal and paternal lineages, we can reconstruct specific migrations. But of course, we've got a wider genome, our whole genetic code. And if we look at that, we get a much wider view of people's ancestry. We can look at a pattern of their DNA makeup and compare it with the pattern of populations all around the world.
The most surprising thing for me is this 2% Native American, and I can't begin to see where that might have come from. Except my mother lived in coastal Wales, and of course, being near a maritime port, you have a huge influx of lots and lots of different people. And I sort of think maybe that might have changed things a little.
My closest marker is Danish. So, which was a big surprise, you know. I mean, there was a Danish king after all in the 11th century. So I mean, I might be of royal blood, royal Danish Viking blood. That would suit me.
Saying you're a Mauritian is like saying you're a Londoner, really. There is no ethnic basis for that population. They're an island of people, and that island, because it was on the naval trade routes, I guess, has variously been taken over and run by pretty much every colonial power in history. I guess that's what you're seeing in my genome, that diversity.
More recent migrations don't figure in the results. But as techniques evolve, more detail will emerge about the paths taken by both our ancient and our more recent relatives.
We're going to see some major advances in the next few years. There's some really exciting science that's just happening right now.
We're living in a time where mass migration is much more prevalent because of the technology we have. And so the genomes in the future will be much more interesting.
Who knows what we're going to know in 10 years, in 50 years, in 100 years. It might be a very, very different picture.
We're all mingled. We've all, been part of this small group of hominids at one point.
It shows, I suppose, a unity of the human population. We are generally all part of one big, I was going to say big happy family, we're not always happy, but one big family that has found different places in the world to live in.